Hello, and welcome to this episode of EPRI Current. I'm your co-host, Bill Florence, and today we've got a great topic to discuss: supply chains and how it impacts the energy industry. My guest today is Robin Bedilion. Robin, hello. Thank you for joining us, and please tell us a little bit about yourself first.
Hi, Bill. Thanks for having me. Hi, everyone. I'm Robin Bedilion, and I'm a principal project manager at EPRI. I've been at EPRI for a little over 16 years, working in various sectors throughout the Institute. For the last 2 years, I've been in our energy systems and climate analysis group, and for most of that time have been helping to lead some of the more institute-wide research around supply chain.
Robin, so of course, a couple of years ago, the issue of supply chains, everybody was, familiar with that, with not seeing, paper towels or no toilet paper in the grocery stores and things like that. But from an energy industry standpoint, it hit a little bit differently. Why are we looking at this right now, and what's maybe going on, and what's changed, or what's happening?
Yeah. So from the energy perspective, EPRI's been doing our analyses around the deep decarbonization, and what it'll take to have deep decarbonization in the energy sector and in the economy as a whole. And as part of those analyses, we're seeing near term some really significant deployment of wind, solar PV, and batteries, both for stationary storage and in electric vehicles. And when we look at these massive deployments of these technologies over the next 10 to 15 years, the question comes up of, do we actually have the supply chain to be able to meet some of these deployment needs? And so we've kind of taken a step back, and in 2022 developed a white paper that really looked at what is the supply chain around these technologies, where there's some potential challenges or risks and bottlenecks, and what is some of the work that we can do as an institute and as an industry to try to address these for meeting some of these deep decarbonization goals.
I've read the report, and it's a great piece of research, but share with us more about what's in there, some of the highlights from the report, please.
Great. Yeah. So we looked at the supply chain for these technologies from a few different perspectives. We looked at the critical minerals needed to actually be building PV and lithium ion batteries. We looked at the manufacturing capabilities and where they were concentrated, and if we had enough capacity to build this equipment, and then looked at some of the geopolitical considerations around these different minerals and manufacturing capabilities and where they were located in the world. And then especially at the time, transportation was another key hot topic that was taking place at the time. So looked a little bit at the transportation piece also.
Robin, you mentioned critical minerals. What are some of these critical minerals?
Some of the key ones that we've been paying attention to are especially the minerals that are needed for lithium ion batteries. So lithium, cobalt, manganese, or nickel are some of the minerals that really are used in lithium ion batteries and key to being able to deploy those for crystalline silicon PV panels. We're looking at the availability of silicon and of silver for those modules. And so those are some of the key minerals that we're paying attention to.
You also mentioned transportation. Or are there any other sort of considerations around that?
So for transportation and for the lithium ion batteries used in transportation, it's a similar list of minerals that are needed, but then also rare earth elements that are sometimes used in the permanent magnet motors that are used in electric vehicles. And so those are another critical mineral that we've been paying attention to from the supply chain standpoint.
Now, I know you're not a geologist, but what are we, again, use the term rare earth minerals. What are maybe a few of those?
Rare earth elements are really a pretty broad collection of elements that are found in small quantities, but actually aren't that rare. They're just usually not the main mineral that's being extracted. It's more that they are a byproduct of another mineral that's being mined, and so not found in very large quantities. And with a lot of these minerals, what we are seeing is that they're concentrated in fairly limited locations across the globe, and especially the current supply chain around them. So the mining, cobalt is primarily mined in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Rare earth elements have a really heavy concentration in China, both for mining and especially for processing. And so we're seeing those concentrations of those critical minerals in a few select locations. And that's where some of the real concern around those minerals are, not necessarily that they aren't available, but just that they're fairly concentrated. And when we start to consider some of the geopolitical and environmental and social considerations, that can be a little bit of a consideration when looking at the supply chain and potential risks and bottlenecks.
Right. And very, very few of those are located within the United States. So that is an issue for that. So what are, to discuss some, so there obviously seems like there are a number of challenges there. So what can we do about those challenges?
So there's a lot of research being done both within EPRI at the Institute and more broadly around critical minerals and then around technology availability in general. So from the mineral standpoint, there are ways to reduce the amount of minerals that are needed for producing energy, both through substituting minerals within a technology, looking at different battery chemistries or different PV module technologies. You can also look at just if you are able to extend the life of a project or increase its efficiency for the same amount of material going into it, you ultimately are reducing the amount of material needed over the lifetime of the project or the amount of energy that's produced. So doing research around improving efficiencies, improving lifetimes. We also have a lot of work being done around the recycling of these technologies at their end of life, being able to extract those minerals back out at the end of their lifetime and being able to then reuse those in the supply chain for making new equipment, and looking at really thinking in the upfront design of a PV module or a battery about that end of life recycling. And so designing it up front in a way that it can more easily be recycled on the back end, more easily extract those minerals and get value out of it. And then kind of part of the circular economy that I know you talked about a few podcasts ago with our circular economy experts.
Are there any global standards in place or maybe being considered in this area?
Yeah, there is some research going on around that, and that's seen as a way to really help to make the supply chain overall more sustainable and more keeping environmental and social standards at the forefront of thought. So there is some work that's kind of been taking place in a maybe more piecemeal standpoint. The EPRI Sustainability Group does do some research around those standards, bringing together supply chain experts to look at it from a sustainability perspective and really trying to up the global standards around supply chain so that you have something that you can measure your supply chain against and help encourage that the overall supply chain, both the mineral extraction and processing and the equipment side of things, is looked at from that holistic perspective.
Now, you touched upon some of the supply chain issues for things I think that we're very familiar with. Whether it's solar or wind turbines and stuff like this. But what about any sort of new decarbonization energy sources? Whether it's advanced nuclear or hydrogen or something like that. Are there the same type of supply chain issues, or do they present their own challenges and opportunities?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as we were doing our research for these near-term technologies and presenting that work, we did start to get those questions. Well, what about all these other technologies that we think we're going to need for deep decarbonization? And so, as you mentioned, that includes advanced nuclear, hydrogen, carbon capture and storage. What do we need to be thinking about there? And so we have just this year, especially within this broader scope of work, started to look at the supply chain needs for that kind of next generation of technologies. So looking at advanced nuclear, what is needed to be able to start deploying these technologies over the next 10 to 15 years. And some of the challenges might be the same for electrolyzers and fuel cells for hydrogen. It does come down to some mineral considerations and the amount of minerals needed for the catalysts or for being able to produce energy from those. For things like advanced nuclear, especially, it comes down to more the manufacturing capabilities for some of those really large components, the advanced materials that might be needed for those, making sure that we have the codes and standards in place for being able to deploy those in the nuclear space, meeting the standards that the nuclear industry has to meet. So we have a lot of research going on in some of our other areas, one of them being our advanced manufacturing methods and materials initiative that are looking at some of those next generation components that are going to be needed for those advanced technologies, and how we can start working today with the industry and with vendors and suppliers to be able to know that we're going to be able to deploy those at scale when those technologies are needed.
And EPRI's not doing this research in a silo, correct? I mean, EPRI's collaborating with other research bodies or industry organizations.
Yes, yeah, and that's one of the great things about EPRI is the collaboration that's taking place across the industry. So, in April of this year, there was a workshop as part of the advanced manufacturing methods and materials work that brought together vendors and suppliers and stakeholders and manufacturers and workforce people to all talk about some of those needs to help advance the industry. And so coming together and working on kind of figuring out what those next steps are. We've worked with the Nuclear Energy Institute to develop a roadmap for advanced reactors, identifying key steps that are needed, both supply chain related and otherwise, to advance, to be able to meet advanced nuclear needs down the road. A lot of our recycling related research is done with other organizations, and a lot of government funding helping to support some of our research areas. So a lot of great collaboration, I think, just across the industry in this space.
What are some other challenges facing in dealing with supply chains these days? I mean, I'm sure that there's got to be some sort of like cybersecurity concerns among others, correct?
Yeah, several other areas. So cyber is definitely an area where wanting to understand the bill of materials behind the software that's included in some of our advanced technologies, advanced controls. So understanding kind of the whole supply chain of that software, which is a really interesting piece of work that folks in our cybersecurity team are doing. Transformers and grid infrastructure in general is another area where, kind of coming out of the pandemic, we've seen some challenges around the lead time around some of this big equipment, and being able to get those installed when they're needed, both replacing existing assets and the build out that's required for decarbonization in general and building out all these new wind and solar plants. You also need the transformers on the system to be able to connect to the grid. So that grid infrastructure is a really key area. And then another piece that kind of tangential to supply chain, but also really important, is the workforce and having the people to be able to build these technologies, operate the plants, maintain the existing fleet. And so that workforce piece is another one that we're paying attention to, and actually did a companion white paper around workforce last year also.
I was going to ask you, I mean, it sounds like EPRI's doing a lot of work in a lot of different areas, but I mean, so is that EPRI's primary role in this moving forward now? Is conducting that type of research or getting involved with these collaborative efforts with others?
Yeah, I think we have a lot of different ways to engage. So I think one of the key things is just keeping our members informed of some of the challenges and some of these potential bottlenecks that we're identifying, and how so that they're aware of it and can work on planning and trying to address it. We actually just published a white paper a few days ago that's talking about just the breadth of supply chain related research taking place at EPRI. There's over 30 projects that are touching on supply chain in some way, whether it's the recycling piece or the transformer piece or the validating new vendors that are coming onto the scene to help try to fill some of these supply chain gaps. So a lot of really great research that's taking place across the institute around these different aspects of the supply chain to try to have a good full picture of what's going on and where we might be able to help move the industry forward.
You mentioned the white paper, this new white paper. Where can people find that white paper?
Yeah, so it's a publicly available white paper. If you search on EPRI.com, it's called Epis Research and Development to Address Supply Chain for Today and the Energy Transition.
I hope they make the when they make the Netflix movie out of that. I hope they make the title a little catchier, but it sounds fascinating. It sounds fascinating.
It's a great compilation of just the broad amount of work that is being done at EPRI from a lot of different perspectives. So I thought it was really interesting to compile that list of work.
So now, just between us, what do you really think about supply chain?
Just between us and all of our listeners.
Exactly.
Yeah. There are a lot of challenges right now. We are seeing this massive deployment of these technologies. There are some of the geopolitical considerations that are definitely something that we need to pay attention to. And as a result, we are seeing some project delays and cost increases in the near term as we're sorting through some of those challenges. But overall, I'm optimistic that we can really kind of address these challenges. And maybe it's because I'm just optimistic in general, or maybe it's because I work with a lot of really smart people who just know how to address technology challenges. But, I think between technology innovation and working on some of these lifetime and efficiency challenges and the proactive research that we're doing around codes and standards and new materials and new manufacturing methods, I think we've got the right people that are looking at these challenges both within EPRI and more industry wide, and that we're going to be able to find solutions to meeting some of these challenges and continue on this pathway towards economy-wide deep decarbonization and this clean energy transition that we're in the middle of right now.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add in closing, or do you think that pretty much summed it all up?
I think this sums it up well. It's been a fascinating area of research to get involved in, and I've really enjoyed what I've gotten to learn so far, and I'm excited to continue to see the industry kind of work together and progress forward in meeting some of these challenges.
Thank you, Robin. We enjoyed having you on today. As Robin mentioned earlier, if you'd like to download a copy of the report she mentioned or of any of the other reports that EPRI has done regarding supply chains, please visit www.epri.com. That's it for this episode of EPRI Current. I'm Bill Florence. I'll talk to you soon. If you like today's show, we invite you to subscribe to our podcast. And feel free to share the podcast with your colleagues and friends. For more information about EPRI, please visit our website at www.epri.com. And don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter at EPRI News. Together, we are shaping the future of energy.